Chapter 29 of Tribute, Part 1.
Sunshine, sunshine, ladybug's awake.
Cadence. Twilight's chest tightened as she read the line over again. She could hear her old full-sitter's voice in her mind, see the enthusiastic smile that always accompanied that foolish greeting. Even deep in the crystal caverns under Canterlot, Cadence had been able to smile.
I've thought about you almost every day since I left Canterlot, Twilight, but it still feels strange to write those words. I admit, I'm out of practice. I've had little time or opportunity for pen pals with all that's happened, and truthfully, I have little reason to believe you'll ever read this. But I know I must leave something of myself here before I move on. I can't bear the thought that you or any pony else I love might, by some miracle, find this place, hear of my being here, and be left with only stories from the crystal ponies and a cold trail. There's a catharsis as well, writing it all out. I can at least imagine you reading this, even if you never do. I don't know how much you know, so I can only start from when we last saw each other. At the wedding. It feels like a lifetime ago. In some ways, it truly is.
Twilight's hooves were shaking. Was this finally it? A written account of the end of Equestria from someone who had lived through it all? She took in a deep breath and continued down the page.
I still don't really know how the changelings infiltrated Canterlot. Shiny had been warned, but I think that was a decoy to draw attention away from the interior. It all happened so fast, and if Luna hadn't appeared to help us escape from Chrysalis and her drones, I fear that Equestria may have died that very day. I told them that we couldn't leave you. You had risked so much to save me, but I was helpless to return the favor. There's so many things that we might have done different, and I'll never know if any of them would have changed anything. Celestia ordered the evacuation with tears in her eyes. I don't remember many details, and never had the time to ask for them afterwards. She cast a spell I didn't think was possible, encasing the city in stone, and then burned an escape path through the mountain. Luna stayed back to help the guard hold the entrance, and we were able to get most of the city out evacuated. I didn't see Shiny for a week after that. If by some miracle you ever get to read this letter, I imagine you must be shocked to see what's become of our world. It breaks my heart to write that, despite living through it all from the very beginning and spending a century poring over every memory, I still know so little. A century?
Twilight paused, rereading the line.
So she survived! But then why isn't she here?
The smile that had crept onto Twilight's face faltered. She shook her head, reading on.
My earliest memory of it was in Philadelphia. We were organizing a food drive for the refugees, and of course tensions were high. We had been expecting some stress, but...
Twilight frowned. Most of the paragraph had been scratched out. Splotchy water stains were soaked into the page around it, preserved alongside the ink by the magic.
Fights broke out, and some of them went beyond words. By the time we realized what was really happening, it was already too late. At first I thought I was the only one suffering. It lurked in the back of my mind and pushed me toward dark thoughts, tried to get me to manipulate those around me and call attention to myself. To steal lovers from others and even kill those that spurned me. Then I began to see it in those I loved as well. Shiny drove his troops harder and became distant at home, and Luna retreated into herself, speaking barely a sentence on any given day. We didn't even realize she had disappeared until days later, when every Thestral in the Night Guard vanished overnight. Shiny never forgot about you, Twilight. None of us did. When he told me he was going back to Canterlot to find you, I wanted to stop him. But I saw that look in his eyes. He would have stayed if I had asked. But the guilt would have destroyed him. I wanted to go with him, but there were millions of others that needed me too. I suppose he was always more of a brother than a husband, and I was always more of a princess than a wife. I'm convinced I killed him when I let him walk out those doors. But perhaps it was better that way. I'm glad I can remember him as a brother going to save his sister, instead of the thing he was being twisted into.
Twilight sniffled, one hoof reaching over to clutch at the saddlebag that still bore her brother's crest and the old journal within. It was difficult to imagine him as some cold-faced commander, instead of the warm, friendly sibling she remembered.
He had a good death,
Midnight said. She nodded.
and he was himself at the end.
She took a deep breath and continued reading.
For some reason, I thought Celestia was above the corruption. I saw her more as part of Equestria than in it, and whether from optimism or denial, I refused to acknowledge that she was falling victim to it as well. Looking back, I should have seen the signs. She was distracted and bitter when she sent me here to the frozen north. She said we might find some way to stop the corruption in the ice. Something to save us, but she wouldn't tell me exactly what. I think it was her corruption holding her back. But instead of pressing harder, I gave her space. I thought perhaps she needed to be alone.
Twilight pursed her lips, blinking damp redness out of her eyes as her voice broke.
That's not what she needed. How would you know such a thing? Because I remember what it was like.
Twilight looked up, meeting Midnight's impassive gaze.
I felt so alone, Midnight. I pushed my friends away because I didn't want them to suffer the same pain I was, but Celestia, she was surrounded by ponies going through the same thing. They could have carried it together. Will you ever accept that it wasn't your fault, little flower?
Midnight shook her head slowly. Her lips curved down into a soft frown as her voice echoed in Twilight's head.
Celestia was alone, yes, but she herself sent Cadence away. Perhaps for the same reason you kept your own friends at a distance. She would have done the same thing to you. No, we were different. If I'd just been there...
Twilight choked back a sob.
We could have beaten this together. Or lost together.
She sighed, looking back down to the letter.
I wouldn't have to be alone.
For a long moment, Midnight said nothing. Twilight's eyes scanned the page without seeing.
Do you feel alone now?
Twilight risked a glance up. Midnight held her gaze, clenching her jaw.
That wasn't fair of me to say.
She bit her lip, wiping her tears away and clearing her throat.
I'm glad you're here. But you would be happier if I wasn't.
Midnight said matter-of-factly.
I hurt our friends and twisted our body. And you wish I'd never existed.
Twilight opened her mouth to offer a response, but no words came out. Midnight would know if she lied. There was no point in denying the accusations. After a few seconds of hesitation, she found her voice.
But you've done good things too. If you weren't there to help me, then Rainbow would have been captured by Gava, or Philomena might have killed me and my friends, and who knows what might have happened on Alta Lucia.
Her confidence grew as she spoke, lending strength to her voice.
You helped me save Spike, helped me cross the ocean, helped me survive and get where we are now. I couldn't have done any of this alone. Yes, I've helped you overcome obstacles created by my own presence. You were unable to save our friends alone because you feared what I was doing to you. And they would have been able to help you get here if you hadn't isolated yourself from fear of what I'd do to them.
She looked away, narrowing her bloodshot eyes.
Was my assistance worth the cost of your suffering?
Again, Twilight found herself at a loss. But she recovered quicker this time. She let Cadence's journal fall to the table.
You're reminding me of myself, back in Canterlot. What happened to the pony that was always whispering in my ear to hurry up, reminding me of what we needed to do when I faltered, chastising me for wasting time and energy on emotions? She wouldn't let these doubts get in her way when we're exactly where we need to be.
She offered an encouraging smile as Midnight's eyes narrowed.
But she is. So maybe I can help.
She took a deep breath, straightening and looking intently into Midnight's eyes, speaking through their mental connection and focusing on the meaning behind every word.
I didn't ask to meet you, but I don't regret it. We didn't understand each other at first, but you've helped me overcome barriers I didn't even know I had, and been at my side every step of the way. You forced me to fight to protect my friends when I was too afraid to do it myself, and kept me going when I was at my lowest. But more important than what you've done for me, I'm glad for how I've been able to help you. You've learned so much about friendship, about life, about yourself. And even if we'd failed at everything we tried to do together, I would still be glad that I could help you become the pony you are now. Because you're my friend.
She paused to let her words sink in, before walking back to the table and sitting down in front of Cadence's journal.
Now, let's get back to saving Equestria, all right?
Midnight was silent for several seconds, and for a brief moment Twilight thought she might have gone too far. But then her dark passenger let out an amused snort, walking up to her side and leaning against her.
Yes. Let's get back to it.
Twilight smiled as the strange, tingling warmth of Midnight's presence buzzed over her fur. She took a deep breath and focused back on reading.
I could never have imagined what awaited me here. My party roamed the tundra for days, searching for anything that could be of use. And just as I was readying myself to return empty-hooved, I saw the answer. It appeared in a great flash of light, surrounded by a dome of powerful magic. At first, I was convinced it was another illusion, created by my corruption, but my companions saw it too. And as we approached, I became less sure. I wish you could see it, Twilight. An entire city made of crystal that seemed to glow like a second sun. It was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Even my corruption seemed to quiet as I walked through its streets. For the first time, I believed there might really be a cure. I talked to the ponies that lived in it, but they could tell me nothing. There was some malediction hanging over them, clouding their minds. Just after sending my first report to Celestia, I learned its source. His name is King Sombra. And if you're reading this, you've likely met him already. I can't even guess how long he's been alone now, and he may not be the same pony I learned to work with, as allies if not friends. He may seem cruel, but he cares deeply about the crystal ponies in his own way. Please don't fight him. Nothing is more important than destroying this awful sickness, and Sombra has helped me come closer than anyone else. Sombra? We have yet to meet a Sombra.
Twilight shook her head with a thoughtful frown.
Cadence must have written this letter centuries ago. Anything could have happened to him. Shaper claims that he was there when the floods were called.
Midnight mused.
Perhaps they are one and the same. Maybe she'll explain more later.
Twilight suggested.
I didn't even realize he was a pony at first. The way the crystal ponies described him, he seemed more like a mindless monster, and I treated him like one. I underestimated him, and he exploited that to turn many of the crystal ponies to his side. By the time I understood I was dealing with an intelligent enemy, the Crystal Empire had fallen into civil war. I wrote to Celestia for help, thinking I could stall until she arrived. To save the lives of the crystal ponies and my own entourage, I lured him into the crystal spire and cast a spell to seal him inside. But he was far stronger still than I'd anticipated. He could sense me everywhere I went and used magic foreign to me. I don't know how long he chased me, but several times I felt the shadow of death fall on me. When Celestia finally arrived, I cried tears of joy. But there was something wrong with her. She told me she had come to destroy the Crystal Empire and save Equestria, and she wore 3 amulets I had never seen before, though their power was obvious to me. She wasn't thinking straight, Twilight. I couldn't let her kill all those innocent ponies. She accused me of abandoning her, of betraying her, of luring her north into some kind of trap. And when she struck me, it was Sombra that offered to help me subdue her. As much as it broke my heart, I accepted. Those 3 days were among the most terrible of my life. And I've been through so many terrible things. Seeing her truly apply her power to violence is both horrifying and awe-inspiring. It's like fighting the sun itself. Just as I thought she was going to kill me, Sombra caught her in a magic that I still don't fully understand. She stopped fighting, but the expression that came over her then was... It's haunted me ever since. It was then that she cast the spell that flooded the world.
Twilight froze halfway down the page. Her eyes passed over the same sentence several times. Mind blank.
It's true,
she whispered.
She really did it.
She paused, waiting for the wave of despair and confusion to crash over her, but it never came. There was just the same tightness in her chest that had waxed and waned with each paragraph, and the nervous, jittery beat of her heart.
Twilight?
Twilight licked her lips.
I need to know why. There was nothing I could do to stop her. I didn't even realize what she had done at the time. She held me in place with her magic and tore the amulets from her body. She poured power into them until they shattered, and I felt the ley lines of the world snap, like someone pulling my horn straight out of my skull. When my vision stopped spinning and the pain finally faded, I saw her standing over Sombra, completely frozen in crystal. His face was twisted with a terror I didn't think he could feel. She left without a word, but I caught a glimpse of the smile on her lips. She almost looked like she used to, save for the blood dripping from her eyes. I thought perhaps she'd found some other, less drastic solution to the corruption. Then the rain started. What?
Twilight bit her lip, skimming ahead.
What about Celestia? Is that it? Steady, Twilight. I need to know why she did it.
Twilight's hooves began to shake.
Cadence was right there. She must have some idea. Focus on the words.
Midnight's calming voice settled over Twilight like a warm blanket.
Focus. Read. The rain came down in angry, violent sheets, hard enough to knock down a weaker pony. But the Crystal Empire is high in the mountains, where I thought it was safe from the flooding, and I ordered my party to prepare for the trip back to Equestria. I wanted to find Celestia, ask her what she had done, and do what I could to help. The rain made travel difficult and hazardous, and it took us much longer than previously to reach the foothills, but that was probably for the best. By the time we crested the southernmost ridge, most of Equestria was already underwater, and the rain was still coming. There was nothing we could do but flee back to the Crystal Empire, racing to outpace the floods. We helped evacuate the crystal ponies and gather them high in the spire, sealing every entrance. Honestly, I thought the rains would never stop. I put on a brave face, but I'd already given up hope by the time the sun came out again. It almost didn't matter. We had no way to feed ourselves, nowhere to go, and no pony to reach out to for help. My corruption was stronger than ever, and I truly considered flying away and never looking back, if only so that the ponies I left behind could die with some semblance of peace. All would have been lost, if not for Sombra. Somehow he's alive in that crystal, and he can speak and even cast his strange magic from within it. He calls himself Shaper now, though he gets angry whenever I ask why. He has tried many times through both trickery and diplomacy for my help in freeing him from his crystal prison, but I think it's best that he stays where he is. He may be willing to help when the survival of his empire is at stake, but I fear he wouldn't hesitate to terrorize the crystal ponies again if he were free to do as he wished. Sombra is Shaper. But that means...
Twilight's brow furrowed as she skimmed over what she'd already read.
The spell that Cadence mentioned. He must have done something to Celestia to get her to destroy Equestria.
She nodded, encouraged by the idea.
It's not her fault. He tricked her. Surely by now we understand that good and evil cannot be so easily separated.
Midnight cautioned.
We must get both sides of the story. Don't worry. We will.
Twilight said darkly.
I'll need him to explain what he did so I can reverse it.
She continued reading, ignoring Midnight's silent exasperation.
It's because of him that we survived. He showed me the hiding place of a powerful artifact, the Crystal Heart, and taught me how to use it to inspire the crystal ponies and manipulate the crystal of the spire to build at its peak above the ice. He helped me build a pair of arcane airships and taught the crystal ponies to hunt, to use the bodies of the monsters that roamed the ice for food and tools. After so long, I thought that perhaps he'd reformed, or maybe I had misunderstood him. And I let my guard down. Don't make the same mistake, Twilight. You cannot trust him to act except to serve his own interests, and he is old and clever. I was forced to shatter the Crystal Heart before he could turn it to a darker purpose. Our partnership has grown bitter since then. At great expense to myself, I've sealed him below the ice, though he sometimes tricks corrupted ponies into sneaking below to join him through some manipulation I cannot sense. I've come to love these crystal ponies almost like they were my own children, and have spent over a century watching them prosper in their own way. It's clear to me now that I'm no longer needed here. Alongside these letters, I have left the result of my studies on the 3 gems I found broken after my battle with Celestia. Even after thousands of hours of study, I know little, but I believe they're the remains of some ancient amulets known only to Celestia. I've also left a shard of the Crystal Heart. Although its magic is far diminished compared to the whole, I found the shards invaluable in suppressing my corruption, and so I've left one here as a potential aid for you, or any pony else who finds this place. Please don't hesitate to use it. The relief is temporary, but far better than the alternative.
Twilight looked up to the cylindrical vessel in the middle of the alchemical table, examining the crystal shard within. Carefully, she reached out with her magic, opening the little door on top. She felt Midnight tense as the shard's light brightened.
I don't like it.
Twilight snapped the door shut.
Does it hurt? No.
Midnight spoke the word in a low growl, letting it sink in before continuing in a more normal tone.
It does not hurt me by presence alone, but it discomforts.
Twilight nodded.
It could be useful. It could be.
Midnight agreed.
We should take it when we leave, within its container, along with the amulets.
Twilight turned to the 3 little chests she had set aside while reading. She had left them open, allowing each of the shattered gemstones to give off small colored glows as they cast their powerful auras. It was strange to think that such little things could be responsible for destroying her world, even with an alicorn behind them. How could such powerful artifacts exist even when a princess like Cadence didn't recognize them? She shook her head, filing the question away for later. The letter's last paragraphs were still to be read.
I'm not sure what I'll be looking for when I leave the crystal ponies behind, but I can't stay here forever. The crystal ponies don't need me anymore, and the memories formed here haunt me to this day. If you're reading this, don't fear for me. I've lived through the end of the world and faced the mare who wrought its destruction. Maybe I'll return someday. I'd like to find a letter waiting for me if so. One more thing, Twilight. I know you may be curious about the letters I've written to others, and you may read them if you wish. But please, don't touch the one for your brother. Not even if he says you can. I love you, Twilight. Please don't blame yourself for anything. Unlike us, you never had the chance to stop it.
There was a small space left at the bottom of the page, with only a single curvy heart drawn on the side. Twilight pulled a pen out of shining saddlebags, her lips curving into a sad smile.
What are you doing? You'll think I'm silly. And has that ever stopped you before? It's just something Cadence and I used to do when we wrote each other.
Twilight could feel her other half's curiosity as she clicked the pen, setting it to the paper next to the heart with a deep breath.
We always started our letters the same way, and signed them once we finished reading.
The pen glided across the paper with an easy familiarity.
Clap your hands and do a little shake.
She set the pen aside, leaning back and gently blowing on the fresh ink.
Now the letter's complete.
Midnight snorted, but Twilight ignored the obvious disdain. Instead, she turned to the page, taking care not to smudge her ink before it dried, and began to flip through the rest of the journal. Several pages at the front were dedicated to letters Cadence had written to various ponies. Some names she recognized, such as Princess Luna, Princess Celestia, and Shining Armor. Others were foreign to her, though a couple shorter letters looked to be addressed to crystal ponies. Past the letters, the journal was filled with extensive notes on the three amulets, listing what magic properties Cadence had discovered and theorizing far beyond them. The blue and green gems appeared to have unique magic signatures unlike anything else Cadence had seen. The red gem, however, had an aura that resonated with both of the others simultaneously. Twilight carefully shut the journal, resting a hoof over its cover.
We should leave this here for now, along with the crystals. Cadence hid these here for a reason, and we can't risk Shaper getting hold of them. Agreed.
Midnight drew Twilight's gaze towards the door, where she was waiting expectantly.
Are you ready to confront him once more?
Twilight nodded. Cadence's letter had given many answers, but it also raised questions that burned hotter than ever before. Why would Celestia ever do something so unimaginably destructive? The question loitered in her mind, like a vulture circling a dying animal, impossible to ignore, and Shaper was the best lead she had for an answer. She turned and walked back to the door, calling on her magic. The spire's resistance felt weaker here, so it only took her a few seconds of focus and a brief headache to cast her teleportation. She popped back into existence out in the hall, swathed in darkness, and immediately erected an arcane shield. She caught a brief glimpse of a crystal pony stepping back, retreating into the shadows. And then, all was still. You return empty-hooved, equestrian. Shaper's voice echoed around her. Did you find the truth you seek?